Hello everyone, today we're going to be doing a PlayStation 5 digital edition. HDMI port is broken in this one, so we're going to fix it. Alright, so you look at the PS5, that's the top, and we're actually going to be taking the bottom off. Take the cover and then the grill off of there. And what I like to do, you're going to need a Torx 9. T9. I go ahead and I unscrew all these screws. A lot of them are different, but I keep them in place. So just go around, get all of them, and unscrew them. Right now, we're actually peeling up this little compartment hidden under a sticker where the fan plugs in. I do the fan last. Same with the fan. Leave the screws where they are, then lift the plate off, and then you can lift the fan off and put the plate back on. So that way you don't have to keep track of all these screws. They are different. There's like 3 or 4 different size and pitch and threads and all those. So easiest way to do it is this way. Leave them all where they come out, or just sitting in their holes. Alright, so now the last thing we have to do to get this open is take off the M.2 drive expansion bay cover, and then we can lift it off. Now, as you can see, I did not get all these screws out completely, so that's what I'm doing. I got just a little electric screwdriver because, as you will see shortly, this thing has a lot of screws. So, if you get them all out, you can lift it directly up. This is the digital edition, so there's no disk drive, so you don't have to unplug that, which you would have to do on the disc edition, of course. Alright, so now we're in. First thing we're going to go ahead and do is I take a bolt out, and then I say, no, let's do this instead. So we're going to take off these connections. And by each connection, there's actually writing that will tell you where the wires need to go back. So don't worry about labeling them. I just use some tweezers. They're little coaxial nipple dealies. Then there's another little connector as well, ribbon cable right there. Alright, so I've taken out another bolt, but I want to show you something before we start doing all that. Alright, so the way you know where there are not going to be bolts when you put it back together is if you have these 2 little symbols. There's 2 little plus or negative signs on each side of the holes that do not have bolts in them. So you do not need to mark these where the bolts either go or do not go, because you'll just know if it has those little 2 marks on either side, those are actually places where the bolts securing the outer case go through, and not these small heat shield screws or bolts. So now you just go around and you take every single one out, and I believe I counted 40. There's either 43 or 44 of these freaking things. That's why I have this screwdriver. It still takes a very long time. So they're all the same. So it just takes a little bit of time to just go through and take them out, put them over, and take them out. Alright, so we got the heat shield completely unscrew bolted, and now we just pry the heat shield up and off. As long as we got all the bolts, this will happen without a problem. And now we are closer to where we need to be. Alright, so there are a few ribbon cables that were hidden by that heat shield. You press down in the middle on that connector, and you can pull the front panel assembly, or front panel buttons up and out of there. And there's my beautiful beard. and mustache. All right, there are also 2 screws. One there, it's got a little arrows. It's got arrows towards them. That's where you know where they go. And then you've got 2 Phillips heads that hold the CPU, GPU retainer on there. And then you got a little spacer plate as well. All right, now you can pick this whole thing up and out. Now it is held on with the thermal paste, which is metal, liquid metal. And there's also these 2 pins here. I'm going to flip it over and show you. That goes into the power supply. So those slot in, and it will make it a little bit harder to pull out. So just pull that out. I'm showing you the liquid thermal paste. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and get rid of this broken HDMI port. What we're doing now is getting some flux on the old port so it'll come out easier. What we're actually we're going in with a soldering iron, and we are putting some leaded solder on these pins. We're going to do it on all the pins of the HDMI port, as well as flip it over and do it on, well, actually on both sides of the legs of the port as well that hold it onto the board. It's going to make it a lot easier with our heat gun in the next step. All right, so we flipped it over, and we're going to go ahead and put some solder on the legs as well. Get some flux on there first. This melts it all together, gets you a lower melting point. So same deal. Doesn't have to be pretty. Watch out for these little tiny capacitors and resistors and things with your soldering iron and heat gun. If you knock one of them off, you do have to re-put them on, and that is a pain. So just be careful. All right, so that's good enough. These pins, these legs like to stay stuck, so I always go a little crazy with that. All right, so now we've got our heat gun, and I actually have a thing where I just let it sit right above. It's upside down right now, obviously, on the board. Just let it sit there once in the perfect place, and it's just going to do 410 degrees Celsius, and you can see the solder slowly melting. Once it becomes metallic looking, you know that it's going to be, it starts to pool and look really silver, really metallic looking, then you know it's ready to go. Now you also need to be careful with this, because on the other side, we're also heating the pins on the other side. There are pads, and if you do not let it heat enough, you will pull those pads up, and that is not good. It's still fixable, but it's a whole thing. You don't want to mess with it. So overheat these rather than underheat them. Make sure, you see I've got my pliers or my tweezers, and I'm kind of just looking, just touching it. Oh, and it fell out. They really need to fall out. All right, so here's the other side. Here's the actual pins where we're going to be putting the new HDMI port onto. That's what we just took them out of, but opposite side. So I'm going in with some new solder, and I'm just going to clean up the pads and clean up the where the legs go, solder points. Just going through and making sure there's good new solder on there. Some people go through and take the old stuff up. You can do that as well. But this is not only making sure we have a good place for the new port pins and legs to adhere to, but also that we have enough sticking up, so it just, you don't have to do as much work. You don't really have to go in with a soldering iron afterwards. You can see they're kind of balling up. That's really what you want. That's good enough. Alright, I just like to clean it up a little bit. You can see those little resistors and such on there too. Obviously, let it cool a little bit before you start going in with your brush. This is no clean solder, but I do it anyway because I like the way it looks when it's nice. Alright, so now we got a good mixture. And now we're actually going to flip it over. Nope, same size, sorry. Got the heat gun there, preheating the top. And then we're actually going to go underneath, because then we can see the pads all turn. You can see them turning silver right there. That means they're ready to go, but we can see that one right there, that leg is still a dull color. So that means it is not melting yet. So this one was actually kind of being a pain. You can see all the other ones are perfect, all glassy, but that other one was not melting. So I went in and gave it some more solder, and now you can see they're all the way through, and they're all ready to go. So now you could just easily put your port down, and you can just hold it in place for a second, pull the heat off. You can see those connections being made immediately. Now, I actually like to go under a microscope and check each pin and make sure it is good. I go in with my tweezers, and if any of them wiggle, you know that they are not completely connected. And I think I saw one or two of them wiggle a little bit, so I go ahead and go in with my flux. Now, we've got plenty of solder on these pins underneath on the pads, so I just go in with nothing on my iron, and I just touch them and just kind of pull down just a little bit. You don't have to do much, and you don't want to grab any new solder, because you'll bridge these connections, and that's the last thing you want to do, because then you got to get in there with your solder remover. These all look good. You can see they're more uniform, and it looks like it's a better connection. And then I go ahead and I clean it up, and I go in and I see they all look like they're completely soldered in. And then I go in again just to make sure with my tweezer and just touch each one. Make sure they're all solid. One of the main things that happens with these is they get loose just from the plugging and unplugging, and this just gives it a much better connection. They're really soldered in there. Then you can flip it over and see how nicely the pins are, or the legs are soldered in as well. Nice big balls. All right, perfect. So that's good, and now we're going to go ahead and start putting it back all together. So, put our motherboard down. Make sure our wires and ribbon cables are out of the way. The liquid metal thermal paste will stay in place. Don't mess with it if you don't have to. Don't try and replace it with regular thermal paste or anything like that. Just leave it. As long as you don't get it everywhere. I've never had to replace the paste so far. Alright, so we're putting our spacer back in, and then our retainer. It keeps the cooler on the other side of our CPU, GPU. Again, those are Phillips. Don't go crazy with these. Do one side at a time. A little bit on each side, rather, because it is kind of like a spring. All right, ribbon cables back on. Front buttons and control panels, and then we've got our top, and we've also got our ribbon cables. They will say, oh, I didn't zoom in, but they'll say black and white, or they'll have initials by them that'll tell you where they need to go. All right, our big heat sink plate, heat shield. Put the rest of our coaxial style cables for our Wi-Fi and that sort of deal. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, I believe. They can kind of be a pain, so just be patient with them. Don't jam them in there. And then we put in 40 some screws. Don't forget the 2 on the motherboard as well. They're denoted by those arrows. Again, your PlayStation may look a little... There we go. Yep, those are the 2 right there. And they are the same as all the rest of them. There's no difference. Yours may look a little different on the inside. This heat shield may look a little different. There may be a couple different plates depending on the production date. They've changed the design very slightly, and then whether or not it had the disk drive or not. But this one is for an original, I think, a launch model digital PS5. And this one is going to be almost done. Again, don't put them where those little minus signs are. All right, so now we grab our case and we just lower it in. Just make sure all of your bolts are lining up with the holes. Just kind of put it down and kind of jiggle it around, and it should go exactly where it was before. And then just crank them back down. I believe one of these screws is actually going to be underneath a void warranty label thing. This one had been worked on before, so it didn't have that, but you may have to peel a sticker up on the back one. If you're missing a bolt, that's where it is. All right, 4 for the fan. Plug that puppy in. Put your sticker back down. There's a little routing area down there. And then we put our bracket back on for our SM.2. And then we slide our cover back on. Oh, I'm sorry. Nope, we do our fins first. Those kind of give you some circulation, and then you put the cover back on and you did it. All right. Thank you so much for checking out my video. Please like, subscribe, and comment. And again, thank you for watching. I love you all.